So to begin, it's finally here after nearly 8 years of detailed policy making and consultation. And as John has said, it's expected to be in force on or around the 29th of April this year. The states are referring to this law as the CHW law, and I will also. And significantly, it has the effect of repealing the 1949 and 1973 laws in their entirety. But although this is a new law, it still has the same principles. It's to control occupation ownership of housing and to control new businesses and regulate the number of employees engaged. So in simple terms, it's to control who can work here and who can live here. So bearing in mind this is a new law and has the same principles as the old, it's reasonable to ask why so much effort was put into changing it. Well, the reasons for doing so are to create one overarching law dealing with all aspects of housing and business, whereas previously there were several. It's to be a consolidation of powers under the Chief Minister, whereas previously ministerial responsibility was split. It's to develop a system of record keeping and policing via registration cards, and more on those later, and to introduce a clearer language and therefore be easier to interpret than the previous legislation. So, what are the immediately noticeable changes? And I can tell you that the first thing that will strike you is the new terminology to residential categories, which aims to be clearer. No longer will we have references to JCAT, KCAT. It's now 4 categories of residential status to replace the previous 15. New categories, which we soon no doubt know inside out, are entitled, that's the old A to H category and K category, licensed, which is essential employees, that's effectively JCAT, entitled for work, which is those with 5 to 10 years residency, and registered, and that is those with less than 5 years residence. I'd be glad to know that this slide will be covered in much greater detail by Michelle, who is the next speaker. So registration cards is my next noticeable thing. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these are totally new, and they're going to be the backbone of the CHW law. And these cards will record a person's residency categorisation. A Jersey resident will be required to register and obtain a card as soon as any of these, those are the ones with the dashes next to them, trigger events occurred. Now, they are taking a lease of residential property, purchasing or acquiring any land, commencing new employment, or following a move to the island at the end of 3 months' residency. Now, the card is required to be shown if any of the first 3 trigger events occur. Now, the benefits of this card are going to be in how it's used. Employers will no longer have to verify their employees' residential status when starting work, provided they've seen the correct card beforehand. And prior to buying or leasing property, a person only needs to show the correct card to their lawyer or to their landlord. And because of this card, the consent of the housing minister will no longer be required for every property transaction, but there are some exceptions where consent is still required. Now, the states of Jersey are really stressing that these are not identity cards, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions on that. But there's no requirement to keep on you at all times, and there is no proposal to include a photograph. And it's proposed that in the future, the categorisation will be incorporated into the Social Security card. Now I have the Register of Property. This is simply that a new publicly accessible register will record all units of residential accommodation subject to population office control. And under this register, accommodation will be classified as either qualified, which will be familiar to you, or registered, which is new. Qualified means the same thing as under the old system, as I've said, which is the current A, H, J, and where applicable K, but the old term unqualified is now known as registered. Qualified accommodation will only be able to be occupied by entitled or licensed persons, and as a license is effectively the old JCAT, this is actually an improvement on the previous system for them because they can now live in any qualified property, not just a JCAT one. So there we go. Finally, business licensing. Now there'll also be changes to business licensing, which is effectively tidying up the previous system. You still have the concept of undertaking, and that you must have an appropriate license. The regulation of employee numbers will now only apply to limit the number of licensed and registered employees, and businesses will be able to employ an unlimited number of entitled or entitled for work individuals without the consent of the Chief Minister. The application process is more or less the same. The application is submitted to the Population Office, but annual fees may now be charged. And as I've said, due to the registration card, the employer only needs to see the correct card prior to them starting work. And now, enforcement. So finally, it was remarked by one of the deputies when reviewing the draft CHW law that the 1973 law had never been properly enforced. So to remedy that, these new powers will be the snapping teeth of the new law to ensure compliance with licences issued under it. Now, these new powers are the revocation of a licence if false or misleading information was presented at the time of application, the ability to obtain information regarding the licence holder in its business, the ability to enter premises to carry out inspections, and the power to issue notices, that's to cease unauthorised activity, otherwise known as stop notices. Now, it's important to note that outside of the CHW law is an entirely new law, which is called the Register of Names and Addresses Law, which is due to come into force shortly. Now, what this will do is create a new centralised database of name and address information, which will identify unique individuals, and this database will be open for use by all government departments. And all information will be collected from registers created under CHW law will be fed into this, and will no doubt be a reliable and rich source of data for them. And to explain why this is significant, it's worth noting that in the UK, most tax and benefit fraud investigations commence when an inconsistency between two government databases arises and are flagged up by a computer rather than a phone call tipping somebody off. And that illustrates the power of a comprehensive database as an effective tool for enforcement. And of course, there's definitely the possibility to do the same here in Jersey with such a database as well. Now, leaving you with that slightly conspiratorial thought, that brings an end to the brief overview. So I'll now hand over to Michelle, who will speak more on the residential categories. Thank you very much.